Welcome to Samsung Next Meets. My guest today is Michael Bronstein, Head of Graph Learning Research at Twitter. So, Michael, tell us about you and your work.
Right. So I'm a professor at Imperial College London and head of graph learning research at Twitter. And the main focus of my research is what we call geometric deep learning, or sometimes it's also called graph representation learning or deep learning on graphs. So the common denominator of these methods is how to introduce geometric methods or geometric principles into machine learning problems, as well as apply machine learning tools to problems where these tools were difficult to be used. And for example, these could be applications in social media where the data comes in the form of a graph, relations and interactions between different users. It can graphs can be used to model, for example, molecules of drugs. So we are working also on design or virtual screening of drugs, drug repositioning, even using food molecules in place of drugs.
Wow. I want to understand that better. I will get back. We'll get back to that in a minute. But before that, you founded a startup, Fabula, which was acquired by Twitter. What was Fabula doing, and what happened to it after the acquisition?
So Fabula, it was a startup company I founded with my students, and we try to apply deep learning on graphs to the problem of misinformation detection. So we looked at the way that a story propagates on a social network, in particular on Twitter, and we try to from the way that it spreads, to be able to predict whether it's true or fake in whatever definition it is. So it was based on some human annotations. And we got very promising results. So last year, we negotiated an acquisition with Twitter.
And is that what happened to that? Is that technology still in place?
So at Twitter, well, I cannot unfortunately talk too much about this because, well, this is probably proprietary information, but Twitter, obviously, one of the core data assets is graph or multiple graphs of different kind, whether it's follow graph between users, interaction graphs between users and content, and we would like to leverage it better, and deep learning on graphs is one such technology that allows to do it.
And Michael, you said in the introduction that you are head of graph learning research at Twitter. What is learning on graphs? What are graph neural networks? How would you explain it to a 13-year-old or your mother or mine?
Good question. So what are graphs? So graph, it's a mathematical abstraction for a system of relations or interactions. So if you think of a family, for example, family relations, they can be represented as a graph. So different people are what is called nodes of the graph, and relations or interactions between family members are what is called edges. So we, in many fields, we create or collect a lot of such information. So social networks are such example, but there are many other examples that some of them are rather exotic. So if you think of, for example, particle colliders such as the LHC that runs somewhere between Switzerland and France, every collision of particles produces a shower of thousands of different particles. So they are also graphs. So these are graphs that represent collisions and interactions of particles, where some particles are destroyed, some new particles are created. You can think also of atoms forming a molecule, or let's say some big biopolymer such as a protein. They also can be represented as a graph. So the atoms will be the entities, the nodes, and the chemical bonds between them that would be represented by edges. So basically short story is that graphs are really ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They can be used as a model, or maybe somewhat simplistic model, of a lot of physical, social, biological, you name it, systems that we see around us in the world. Now, this data sometimes is very difficult to systematically study and analyze. And if we want to predict, for example, properties of a molecule, we could, of course, run quantum mechanical simulation on a supercomputer, but it will take days sometimes to do it. So graph neural networks offer a way of doing this in a simplified way by learning from examples. So you see examples of such graphs, and then you try to predict properties of this graph from the graph structure, or maybe some additional information that is provided together with this graph. So that's roughly what it is.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if my mother will get it based on that description. Thanks. You're also professor at chair in machine learning and pattern recognition at the Imperial College in London. What kind of work do you do there?
So we also work, well, geometric deep learning is a very broad topic. So I mostly work on everything that I don't work on at Twitter. So at Twitter, we work primarily on large scale graphs, on applications in social media. So in the past years, I'm working a lot in problems somewhere between machine learning, data science, and biology, and different problems from design of proteins. So we basically we create a new protein molecule that has certain functions. For example, it can bind to another molecule, another protein. And as you know, proteins are probably the most important molecules in our body. We don't actually know any life form that is not based on proteins. And because they are so ubiquitous everywhere, from whether they are used to transport oxygen to our cells, or to create the rigid structures in our body tissues, or collagen or in our skin, for example, is also protein. Hormones are proteins, antibodies are proteins, and so on. So it is very natural that they are also used as drug targets. So usually a drug is a molecule that is designed in a way that it attaches or binds to a protein, and then it disrupts or activates some chemical process or chemical reaction. Now, some targets are considered to be notoriously difficult for traditional drug therapies. Usually the way that the molecule binds to a protein is it fits into some small pocket on the molecular surface. Now, there are proteins with flat interfaces where there are no pockets, and they're considered to be undruggable. So you can think of conceptually different type of a drug, which itself is a protein. So we need to design a protein molecule that will bind to another protein. And this is a very promising direction. Well, there are many reasons why proteins could be better than small molecules as drugs. They are natural. You can actually devise them from human proteins. But of course, the key challenge here is how to build a protein that has certain functionality. So that's what we try to address with geometric deep learning. We also work on drug repositioning, for example. So this is a field where you take existing drugs that are already safe and approved, and you try to find new use for them. So you can apply them against different diseases, or you can take a combination of multiple drugs that might have synergistic effect. And these actually don't need to be drugs that you take as pills. These could be drug-like molecules that you take as part of your daily diet. So if you take, if you eat vegetables or fruits, many of them contain, maybe of course in minute quantities, molecules from the same chemical classes as used, for example, in oncological therapies.
Impressive, just impressive. So we at Samsung Next Ventures, we have 4 focus areas. One of them is frontier tech/AI. The other is media tech, which I'm leading globally. And I'm pretty much interested in technological innovations at the intersection of both AI and media tech. That's why I would like to ask you, what are the latest developments in machine learning, and particularly in computer vision?
Yeah, interesting. So probably this will be a little bit longer answer, but when I started working on computer vision, so I come from the background of geometry and well, different types of geometry. So about 15 years ago, maybe something like this, anything that had to do with 3D data, computer vision people said that this is actually not computer vision, this is computer graphics or maybe geometry processing. And now it's amazing that 3D is everywhere, geometry is everywhere. And if you look at CVPR this year, actually the main conference in computer vision, the best paper awards went to most papers that had to do something with geometry and learning. So, well, call it geometric deep learning. Now, what happened in the past decade is our ability to get high quality 3D data. So initially it was from specialized 3D sensors, range sensors such as Microsoft Kinect. I myself was involved in a startup called Envision that was acquired by Intel. So I spent about 7 years at Intel building a technology that is now called RealSense. So these are portable devices that you can embed into into a mobile phone or a laptop or a tablet, and you can acquire 3D information in real time. Now, it appears that with the advance of deep learning, in some cases, you don't even need it. You can get accurate 3D reconstruction that is good for some purposes from 2D image alone. And we've worked a lot on, for example, a synthesis of hands and faces. And one of my students, for example, was involved in a British startup called Real AI that was building 3D avatars. I also cannot say much about this. I'm also an investor in this company, but the technology that they've developed is pretty amazing.
Cool. And that brings us to the machine learning community in Europe. How strong is it? How strong is the machine learning community in Europe from your perspective, especially compared to the US?
Yeah, I think the European machine learning community is very strong. So probably what happened is that a lot of work in deep learning, which has now become, or it has become mainly popular in the last decade, was concentrated in America, in the US and in Canada, even though, of course, there are several experts in Europe as well. And probably the community is now going back to the roots beyond, let's say, the things that could be addressed with deep learning architectures. And probably some of the topics that were abandoned in the past decade are coming back, maybe in reincarnation. So this also has to do, for example, with deep learning on graphs. So some of the works that's preceded by many years, the current interest in graph neural networks are coming back maybe as more principled theoretical foundations. So I would say, in a short answer, the European ML community is very strong.
And where do you find the best machine learning experts in Europe?
I would say everywhere. So in England, of course, there is very strong communities of both academic and industrial, where you find research offices of companies such as Facebook or Google, DeepMind, Twitter, and many others. Universities as well. Well, obviously, Imperial College, Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Edinburgh, and others. Other than that, in Europe, obviously, Germany, Switzerland, France, of course, each with their special flavors and strong points and traditions and different schools of thought. Yeah, Israel as well. So I would say many interesting and tradition and history of research in this field going back many decades.
Yeah. Michael, I personally don't get tired of saying that I believe that Europe needs more engineers founding startups, engineers turning into entrepreneurs. Do you agree? And if yes, what can we do to motivate and help them to go the entrepreneurial route?
Well, actually, I see a lot of them, including students, my own students, including my colleagues. Of course, I think it's never enough, and probably the best way to motivate them is role models. So if you see that your buddies from your year of studies have done a startup and an exit, and they become rich and famous, and probably that's not the only goal. It's just a way of measuring the success and the technological impact, and the technology that they developed in a company lives on and serves some maybe better cause, or is consumed by millions of people. I think this creates probably the best motivation possible.
Good point. Michael, time for a shout out. Name 3 machine learning machine learning experts in Europe that you respect a lot for their work.
Well, in Europe or European. So I think if European, I think
both fine. Both fine.
Both fine. Okay, so let's say in the particular topic of, let's say, graph learning, definitely the very well known names like Jan de Can, who has done some of the important works in this domain. Joan Bruna, his former postdoc and also now professor at NYU. Pierre van der Gijns in Lausanne in Switzerland has done some foundational works on graph signal processing. And for me, he was an inspiration. Max Welling in Amsterdam and his group, they've been doing a lot of cool works on equivariant neural networks, not only on graphs, but also for images and basically bringing ideas from group theory to the domain of machine learning. Many others, but these are probably the first names that come to my mind.
Great. One last question. So you told me that you have an immigration background, and I told you before that that we at Samsung Next that founders and VCs with immigration backgrounds, that is something we try to focus on. That is a topic we are passionate about. I'm also personally passionate about. So could you tell us a little about your immigration background?
Yeah, so I was born in Russia. My family immigrated to Israel when I was 10 years old. So I grew up in Israel. I consider myself Israeli in this regard. Then in the past decade or so, probably even more, I lived in different places, several years in the US, both West and East Coast, then in Switzerland for many years, and more recently in the UK. So I should say that in my circle of friends and colleagues, I think more or less everyone has similar background, born in one country, studied in another country, then worked maybe in multiple places, and now live with maybe as a couple with the better half coming from yet another place. This is also the situation in my family. So my child is both Russian, Israeli, Italian, trilingual, multicultural.
Amazing. Amazing.
This is the future of humankind, I hope.
That's a fantastic final statement. Michael, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.